I'm sure you guys have thought of the components that make up a love story. You've got somebody who may or may not want to fall in love. If you think about like Cinderella, maybe she's off doing her thing. You've got somebody else who comes along who thinks that love is a great idea. They seem like a mismatched couple. Bada bing, bada boom, some Hollywood drama and music comes along, and next thing you know, they're married and life is beautiful, right? For most, well, that's the Hollywood version of love. I'm sure it's gonna shock you that the Jewish version is just a little different. And so I thought I would share a really bizarre story with you tonight that's in the Talmud because, well, A, why not? So it's not a traditional sermon in that sense, but B, like the whole idea of what is love, I think that especially in Western thought, we kind of stop at the chuppah, as it were, at the wedding altar, and everything is fun and you know, whatever you want to go along with that. So the story goes like this. There was a master who had an apprentice. It doesn't tell us what he was a master of, by the way, in the Talmud. It just tells us that he had an apprentice. They had an apprentice, and the apprentice worked for him for many years. And the master also had a wife. And the story implies that she was gorgeous. And the apprentice lusted after the wife. Well, one day the apprentice was sent home to do some work from home, and he decided that he got onto the work from home gravy train, and that was what he was going to do for the master for some time going forward. And the master needed to have something from the apprentice's house. So the apprentice says, well, send your wife, because we can all imagine that that's a brilliant idea given the dynamics as I've explained. The wife stays for not 1, not 2, but 3 days. And the implication in the Hebrew is that it was of her own volition. I'm sure you can imagine there may have been a little bit of drama, as they say, in the master's house. So the apprentice says, and among other people, your wife treated you this way. How could you stay with her? And the master goes, I don't have the ketubah to pay her off. And I'll remind you what the ketubah is. It's not the beautiful thing that we all have hanging on our wall, gorgeously decorated, that you did that day when the rabbi signed it with you. Woohoo! It is a large quantity of money that was given during the wedding ceremony to prevent the husband from unceremoniously divorcing the wife and leaving her destitute. So it was for her protection. It was also considered her ketubah. So the husband goes, I can't give it back. I don't have any money. The apprentice, who the entire time he had been working for the master, had been putting all of his money aside, says to the master, I will loan it to you. The master, thinking that he needs to have a tremendous amount of self-righteousness because everybody is looking at him, telling him, I cannot believe your wife did this to you, says, sure, I'll take the loan, just therefore I can get rid of her. But what would we do when there's loans? I'm sure this is not so long before payday loans, but we can only imagine that there may have been some interest rate attached to this horrible loan that the apprentice had connived and come up with. Well, there was. The master suddenly found himself having to work in the apprentice's house to pay off the loan and was stuck in the house with the wife, the gorgeous wife, who was now having fun with the apprentice. We can imagine the scene, and the purpose of the story, therefore, is not necessarily to remind us about love, but it's to remind us about honesty. It's to remind us about manipulation. And it's also to remind us about the master who was kind of, if you can imagine, didn't quite get the full picture of what was going on. So the need to really be involved and not only rely on self-righteousness and what people are pressuring you to do, but to really do the right thing even if it's hard. And there's, of course, other stories in the Bible. There's a famous story in the Bible in the Talmud, and I'll share one last one. It's kind of how funny it is, where we have two people who Rabbi Abaye sees, and they are walking in the woods. We can imagine a man and a woman, what they might do in the woods if left alone to their own devices. I wonder. Well, the rabbi had the same idea and said, I'll make sure that nothing happens. I'm going to follow them and make sure that they are in the woods, behaving themselves. Turns out that they were. They just decided to go on a walk because men and women can, in fact, be friends together. Dun, da, da, da. They don't do anything, and they say as they part from each other, it was a really enjoyable walk together. Thank you for being my walking companion. The rabbi, we see, turns out, in this case, he was somewhat of a voyeur, and the story goes on to indicate and describe in the way that he was a voyeur in the next moment. And the couple we see in a way as a metaphor for what love is in the rabbinic mind, an opportunity for two people to go on a path together before life happens and they separate. Usually the implication is by death. The rabbis, of course, I think the reason that there was an emphasis in the stories on the ketubah was marriage wasn't all understood to be perfect. Divorce was, in fact, understood to be at times necessary for the biggest value of all, shalom bayit, peace in the home. But there was an understanding that there had to be some sort of possibility of human beings loving, respecting, being together in a way that promoted healthiness, not just in their home, but if you can imagine between the master and the apprentice, if that were to happen all over the community, the inversion of the entire community would take place. And so these stories, I think, that we find, and there are more of them, and I'm happy to share them at a future point, help us understand the value of shalom bayit. The peace in the home is really a foundation for a strong, healthy community going forward. And that the goal of love isn't the romantic Cinderella swooning moments that we enjoy from all of those Hollywood films. But it's really about being good companions as we walk together through the journey of life. Shabbat Shalom.